For decades, Reba McEntire played the role country music demanded of her. Gracious, loyal, safe. She was the woman Nashville trusted to never embarrass the room, never air the damage, never name the people who benefited from her silence. But the industry misunderstood one crucial thing. Reba didn't forget. She kept a quiet ledger of moments no headlines ever recorded, songs taken away, doors closed without explanation, respect slowly eroded behind polite smiles. And she waited. At the Grand Ole Opry's 100th anniversary, amid applause and celebration, Reba leaned in backstage and delivered a single line meant for someone specific. "You know what you did." It wasn't emotional. It wasn't loud. That's what made it dangerous. Within hours, Nashville was buzzing, because everyone knew Reba never speaks unless she means it. And if she finally broke her silence, it meant the story was far from over. Vince Gill was never supposed to be a villain in Reba McEntire's story. To the public, he was gentle, respected, almost untouchable, one of Nashville's good men. That's what made his silence so devastating. In 2001, when Reba was quietly removed from a major CMA duet meant to honor her career, Vince didn't fight the decision. He didn't question it publicly. He didn't even acknowledge it privately. In Nashville, silence from powerful friends is not neutrality, it's permission. Reba understood that immediately. She had spent decades believing shared stages meant shared values. That night taught her otherwise. Being replaced wasn't the real wound. Watching someone she trusted accept the benefit of her erasure without objection was. Backstage, Reba stayed composed, but insiders noticed she stopped lingering. She stopped assuming loyalty. From that moment forward, she began separating personal warmth from professional reality. Vince never explained himself, and Reba never asked. But those close to her say that moment reshaped how she viewed the industry's most respectable figures. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come with raised voices. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed as politeness, and leaves deeper scars because it denies you even the dignity of confrontation. Travis Tritt did not enter Reba McEntire's story as an obvious enemy. He entered it as something far more dangerous, a gatekeeper. In the early 2000s, when a massive collaborative anthem was being assembled to celebrate the endurance and pride of country music, Reba was an early and natural choice. She was invited, recorded demo vocals, and cleared her schedule without hesitation. Then, without warning, her name disappeared from the project. According to multiple studio insiders, Travis quietly objected behind closed doors. Some said he insisted the song should remain a male statement, rooted in traditional masculinity. Others believed he worried that Reba's presence would overpower the record and shift attention away from him. Whatever his motivation, the result was the same. Producers listened, and Reba was removed. What stung most was how she found out. No executive called her. No explanation was offered. She learned through whispers the most Nashville way possible. The pattern repeated months later. Reba agreed to perform at a charity concert connected to the same professional circle. She rehearsed, committed her band, and even reduced her fee. Days before the event, her performance was canceled. No apology, no clarification, just silence. When asked later about Travis, Reba smiled and delivered a line that sounded light to the public but landed hard within the industry. "We don't sing in the same key." It wasn't about music. It was about principles. After that, Reba chose independence over proximity to power, realizing that in Nashville, tradition is sometimes protected, not to preserve it but to control who gets heard. Tanya Tucker was once framed as Reba McEntire's natural ally, another woman navigating a business built by men and for men. For years, that narrative felt true. They shared stages, exchanged warm words in interviews, and appeared united by mutual respect. What ended, it wasn't a blow-up or a headline-making feud, but something quieter and far more damaging. In the mid-1990 seconds, Reba was slated to co-host a prestigious Hall of Fame tribute. It made sense. She was trusted, articulate, and broadly admired. Then, the promotional materials surfaced, and her name was gone. Behind closed doors, Tanya's team had reportedly offered producers exclusive media access in exchange for a solo hosting role. Reba didn't hear it from Tanya. She learned she'd been replaced through her own publicist. That detail mattered. The silence where a conversation should have been turned disappointment into betrayal. The distance never healed. Years later, the break became unmistakable at an all-female CMA tribute celebrating country pioneers. Tanya led the performance. Reba, arguably the defining woman of her generation, was not invited. When fans questioned the omission, Tanya brushed it off online with a remark so casual it felt colder than an insult. Reba didn't reply. She understood the language of Nashville. Sometimes the loudest response is simply not showing up at all. Naomi Judd was not just another name in Reba McEntire's professional orbit. She was family in the unspoken way artists become after decades of shared survival. That is why the 2022 memorial hurt in a way none of the earlier betrayals had. Reba was originally asked to close the televised tribute, a position that signaled trust, honor, and history. She prepared carefully, not as a performer chasing applause, but as a friend saying goodbye. Then, less than 24 hours before the broadcast, everything shifted. Her closing slot was shortened and moved earlier in the program. No phone call, no explanation, just a revised schedule quietly delivered to her team. Two Opry-affiliated decision-makers with long-standing friction involving Reba had intervened. The message was unmistakable. Even grief had hierarchy. Reba showed up anyway. She sang with control, dignity, and restraint. Then she left. No press, no after-party, no forced smiles. Weeks later, when asked about the memorial, she said only that the night broke her heart in more ways than one. That sentence carried years of meaning. It wasn't about airtime. It was about losing the right to mourn publicly after earning it privately. And for Reba, that moment confirmed something painful. Respect in Nashville could still be revoked, even at a funeral. To the public, the Grand Ole Opry represents tradition, gratitude, and permanence. But behind the curtain, it operates like any institution built on power. For years, Reba McEntire navigated quiet friction with Opry decision-makers who believed she was too visible, too central, too influential. These weren't artistic disagreements. They were territorial. Reba had outlasted administrations, trends, and gatekeepers. That longevity made some uncomfortable. She symbolized memory, and memory threatens those who prefer control without accountability. Over time, her presence on televised events was questioned. Her positioning was adjusted, her prominence debated in rooms she wasn't invited into. By the time the Opry reached its 100th anniversary, these tensions were no longer theoretical. So when Reba leaned backstage and whispered, "You know what you did," insiders didn't hear symbolism. They heard specificity. This wasn't about one snub or one show. It was about decades of being managed rather than respected by committees that relied on her legacy while quietly resenting her authority. The Opry survived because of artists like Reba. But institutions rarely thank the people who outgrow their need to ask permission. This is the story Reba McEntire will not finish out loud. According to people closest to her, the fifth betrayal involved a co-headlining tour in the early 2000s. It was a major deal. Schedules were cleared, marketing materials discussed, rehearsals tentatively planned. Then, the project vanished overnight. No call, no explanation. Another artist quietly took her place, and the tour moved forward as if she had never been involved. To the public, it looked like a routine industry change. To Reba, it was humiliation disguised as logistics. Whispers followed. Some named Garth Brooks, others pointed toward Alan Jackson. A few blamed a powerful manager who also held influence within the Opry's inner circle. Reba has never confirmed any of it. In private writings, she describes promises made without witnesses and doors closed without explanation. This betrayal marked the moment she stopped, depending on Nashville's approval. She became more independent, more guarded, and more intentional. Silence was no longer something forced on her. It became a tool she controlled. and that made her more dangerous than any public accusation ever could. Reba McEntire did not endure Nashville by raising her voice or burning bridges. She endured by paying attention, by remembering who stood beside her when it mattered and who quietly stepped aside. For decades, she absorbed disappointments without public retaliation and allowed the industry to mistake her grace for obedience. That misunderstanding worked in her favor. The whisper at the Opry was not anger finally spilling over. It was calculation. A reminder delivered with surgical calm to an industry that survives by forgetting its own behavior. Reba may never list the 5 betrayals. She may never sit down and name the moments that shaped her silence. She doesn't have to. The people involved recognized themselves instantly. They always do. And Nashville understood something else that night. A boundary had been drawn. Legacy is not measured only in hit songs, trophies, or applause. It is measured in who still has the authority to speak when the room expects submission. Reba waited for the moment when memory would matter more than noise. And when she finally spoke, she didn't accuse, explain, or defend. She simply remembered. In an industry that rewrites its past whenever convenient, that kind of memory is not just powerful, it is threatening. As the lights dimmed on the Grand Ole Opry's centennial celebration, one truth lingered long after the applause faded. Reba McEntire had finally reclaimed control of her own narrative, not by exposing names, not by fueling headlines, but by reminding Nashville that memory has a voice, and it doesn't always need a microphone. For an industry built on reinvention and selective forgetting, Reba's calm reminder was unsettling. It suggested that the past is not as buried as some would like to believe, that every quiet decision, every closed door, every betrayal wrapped in politeness is still accounted for by those who lived it. Reba's legacy has never been about scandal. It has been about endurance, about surviving a system that rewards silence until it no longer can. Her restraint was never weakness, it was strategy. She waited until the moment mattered, until the weight of history was on her side. And when she spoke, she didn't accuse anyone publicly. She let conscience do the work. That is why her words landed harder than any tell-all ever could. They forced the industry to look inward, to remember who was lifted up and who was quietly pushed aside along the way. For longtime fans, especially those who grew up with Reba's music, this story isn't about gossip. It's about recognition, about understanding that the voices we trust often carry stories they were never allowed to tell. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of Reba McEntire's journey. She proved that you don't have to shout to be heard, and you don't have to name names for the truth to resonate. Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe Reba's whisper was aimed at specific people, or at an entire system that benefited from her silence? Who do you think those 5 betrayals involved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story stirred memories or made you see country music history differently, give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from behind America's most beloved legends, because the real history often lives between the lines.